June 23rd, 2026. Well, I guess since my last video, I would have to say that it looks like that I was pretty much on track, at least where after a little bit of a brouhaha with Lebanon, that looks like we're probably back on track to getting the Strait open and all that. But the topic that seems to be kind of came up today at the last minute I'm looking at on social media is this whole thing about Tucker Carlson leaving the Republican Party. And I think that Tucker Carlson has been a bit of a troubled soul for some time. I mean, in his last oh weeks or months on Fox before he was canceled, and he was increasingly becoming distant to a lot of things about mainstream U.S. policy. I think, particularly, was very critical of NATO and the NATO as he sees it, and to some degree, I agree with him on this. It was kind of provoking this whole situation that led to the Ukraine war and a lot of destruction for the Ukrainian people as well as now the Russian people as Ukraine has got all these drones going. But I mean, was this all really necessary? I mean, and I think that there, I think he had an interesting point. Um, he was very supportive of Orban, which everybody in the West didn't like, and I guess Orban's finally been defeated after 18 years and replaced with somebody we don't know what this new person's going to do. But that's part of, I think, his thing. He did become a big supporter of Trump, of course, and now apparently, I guess the anti-Semitic bug has kind of got him. And now it's because of this whole situation with Israel and Iran, he's absolutely jumped ship, I guess, and claims the Republican Party is not loyal to the United States. Shades of Marjorie Taylor Greene, same kind of thing. I don't know, but it's kind of interesting because obviously he's not saying not going to be a Democrat, so I may become a libertarian. What the heck? What if you can't actually stomach actually voting for a real candidate that might win, that might just do something you don't like, you can always vote for a libertarian and feel good about yourself. Or I would simply suggest something better: write your own name in. That'd be a candidate you probably can agree with, but seriously, of course, you won't have any electors to actually back that up. So that's. But as far as I think he's a very troubled soul here. It's not that he doesn't have some good critiques of a lot of things, and like I said, I was not a big fan of this thing on Iran, not because I have any hostility to Israel at all. I'm very supportive of Israel. I just don't think this is even good for Israel, frankly. I think that they have miscalculated pretty seriously here. I guess if they think their biggest problem is that Iran will get a nuclear bomb and regardless of the consequences, attack Israel and face the total destruction of Iran in retaliation, just in order to take out a few cities and wipe out Israel, maybe they are. I don't think they're that suicidal, actually. If you look at Iranian behavior over the years, I think they were very calculating, actually, and fairly cautious, really. They didn't even close the Strait of Hormuz until we actually wiped out their leadership and went into a full-scale onslaught against them. Remember, they withstood the 12-day war of the previous year, about a year ago, and didn't close the Strait of Hormuz, right? So you see what I'm saying? But nonetheless, we got it. Now that we're in it, where I get to it is once you're in it, you can't just walk away from it and be responsible. We do have to come to some kind of a conclusion. No, it won't be something that we'll be going home and saying was worth it. But then again, at the end of the Korean War, I don't think everybody was saying it was worth it either. But it really was, actually, in that case. But that's a whole different story, which we don't have time for here. But there's been a lot of wars where the U.S. has done something for another country. Vietnam, for example. I mean, much bigger than this thing by far, and ended up we just walked away and let the communists have it. And now we're having fairly good relationships with the communists over there. So it's hard to know. It's one of those kind of things that you get into. But of course, we've had the various wars in the Middle East, and particularly with the Iraqi offensive against Kuwait. Went to war for Kuwait. We lost more people in that than we did in this one. So, and there was probably, so like I said, I think he's becoming a little bit not actually looking at the big picture and being objective about it. So I don't know what his real bug is here, but he has one. And he's becoming increasingly irrational, I think, over time. So now I guess he will just be out there and with his podcast spouting his opposition to everything. But ultimately, there's really for the moment, two practical political parties that exist, whether you like it or not: the Republicans and the Democrats. And one of the two is almost certain to win. Yes, a third party could emerge and replace one of the other two. Historically, that did happen in the pre-Civil War period, but it doesn't happen very often, and it's probably not going to happen now because there really isn't a clear basis for this alternative, I don't think. It doesn't make a lot of sense, really. And the real threat here isn't a foreign entanglement on as much as it is the domestic situation and the real threat to the constitutional system, by which I mean not just the written constitution, but also let's say, the understood or inherent constitution, the unwritten constitution, and that is really under true threat here by the Democrats, because they really want to rip it up totally and seize power. And so anything that Trump does, good or bad, in the Middle East, I think is a sideshow compared to that, and he doesn't seem to catch this at all. By the way, if you like these videos, please give me a like, subscribe, click the bell for notifications. Also, you could follow me on Rumble if you prefer that site. Yeah, so that's kind of my view on that one. I think he has done a lot of interesting things in some of his investigation, such as the crazy shooter in Pennsylvania, and how the Secret Service didn't seem to be able to get the track on that one. And his 9/11 stuff was kind of interesting in that I think he got to the truth, but he missed the point. The real point was what actually happened on that one, of course, was that apparently the CIA was trying to infiltrate Al-Qaeda, and they thought by letting some Al-Qaeda people come into the country and then working through like Saudi intelligence and the Saudi embassy, we could probably get an infiltrator inside of Al-Qaeda and have our spy inside the Al-Qaeda organization. While we thought we were playing them, they played us and pulled off 9/11. I think that's what was really valid in this 5-part series. But he kind of didn't. He got off on, did somebody actually bomb the buildings and bring them down, or all that sort of stuff, which is almost impossible, actually. I mean, really. But so anyhow, I'd almost believe the robot-controlled airplanes before I'd buy that one. And I don't know if I buy that either. Although there are robot-controlled airplanes called drones that are doing a lot of things nowadays, right? And that's a whole other story, too. I don't get too in depth into. But at any rate, we'll see what happens there. But it looks like a lot of these people, I guess, really wish they were running the show and realize that if they're going to be, they're a bit of a pawn of the big game rather than really running it. So anyhow, all right, enough of that. On to the next. I think that the negotiations have gotten started with the Iranians in spite of the little fracas that Hezbollah tried to stir up. And the question, I guess, on that is, can we have a situation where a ceasefire can hold in Lebanon, and Hezbollah and Israel can both stand back a little bit? I don't know. I mean, like I said, this is so far so good, is what I said in the last one. I still kind of stick with that. Well, but what will ultimately come out of it, I think the best is going to come out is getting the oil coming and get the gasoline prices falling, which they are, and we'll see how that all plays out. I hear all the negativity on our friends on the Judge Napolitano show. I kind of check in to see what that group is thinking. I think they're overly negative, but we'll see. Another thing that needs a little discussion here is the situation in the Russia-Ukraine war, which is also a major thing that apparently is not being. All we're hearing in the Western media is how Ukraine is winning, and that is probably not really an accurate assessment of the situation from what I can see. On the ground, there's really two aspects of the war. There's this, what I call it, the strategic thing, which is largely fought with drone and missile attacks on each other's home country and infrastructure. And the other part is the ground war. Now, in the ground war, essentially Russia's winning that, I think, on almost all fronts except probably the Zaporizhia front. The Ukrainians concentrated some forces and did push back and won a small victory sometime back on that. Um, and so that kind of on the other hand, on the rest of the thing in Donbass and to the north around, Kharkiv and Sumy and so forth, it looks to me like the Russians are gradually grinding ahead. It's a long slog, but it is happening. And so I think anybody trying to say that Ukraine is winning that is really making a mistake. Now, what we'd call the strategic front, which is all the attacks in each side's home countries. Certainly, there's a lot of Ukrainian successes. They blew up this oil refinery, or at least the storage tanks around in Moscow, and that created a lot of fluff. However, you have to realize, even in this case, what was involved was wave after wave of drones coming in until the Russian defenses literally ran out of interceptor missiles, and then they finally got in and blew the thing up. And but it's unclear whether, as some commentators said, is whether this is mainly destroying the storage tanks or the actual refinery itself, which is a different structure, if you will. And so that's another aspect. We'll see how that all plays. But at the same time, there's been a tremendous amount of destruction of Ukrainian assets, particularly in the latest phase. Some of their oil storage facilities are being attacked too. Bridges are being attacked on both sides. The Ukrainians have had some real successes in the connection between Crimea and I guess Kherson area, I guess it would be. And on the other hand, after that, the Russians are building a bunch of pontoon bridges, and there's a lot of attacks. Really trying to basically, it's got down to literally blowing up gasoline stations on both sides, particularly in Ukraine. The Russians are going in and just literally blowing up gasoline station by gasoline station, trying to basically destroy the logistical transport. And there's a bunch of other attacks. Some attacks on warehouses, which are probably where ordnance and drones are being stored. Russia has a real problem there. On the other hand, so does Ukraine in a lot of ways. They just recently, this was just yesterday, they pulled off an attack with Storm Shadow missiles and hit some targets inside of Russia. So those are probably a little gift from the British there. And there's been a lot of discussion, will the Russians escalate in some way? And, at least the crazy talk from Russia has kind of ended, I think, back when Medvedev was out there talking about dropping nuclear bombs on large cities in Europe, such as London, Berlin, and Paris, and so forth. That type of crazy talk has seemed to have stopped. There has been questions. At this point, I again think that there's nothing to be gained really by an overt attack on a NATO country by the Russians, because as long as Russia can get a significant amount of oil shipped out through the Baltic Sea, what they would, if they attack a NATO country, more than likely what would happen is that the NATO navies, it won't even need the U.S. that much. They have a lot of destroyers and frigates and corvettes and stuff in the European countries, could pretty much just blockade the whole Baltic Sea and not let the tankers out anymore. From time to time, they do grab a tanker here or a tanker there, but I don't think that's been a complete shutdown. If it gets to a complete shutdown, then you get into a situation where these ideas have some possibility, And I think there are other ideas been discussed that Russia might actually launch up some kind of a missile attack on factories in Germany and Britain where these, like Storm Shadow missiles, or where components for Ukrainian drones are being manufactured. Again, I mean, that would it could trigger Article 5. However, as I understand it, Article 5 just means that you have to have a meeting, basically. And if one country votes no on going to war, then what you're really faced with isn't a NATO war, but you're faced with the individual countries. And that would require particularly Poland and the Baltic states to agree to it, right? I mean, I don't know whether Poland really wants to go to war. I mean, they could certainly send their army in to bolster the Ukrainians. I don't know. Would this be would the U.S. join this thing? Especially if we're talking about very limited strikes, because, I mean, after all, you know, often when there's limited strikes, such as like the little engagement that occurred between India and Pakistan not too long back, it didn't go to a full-scale war. They just kind of decided to call it off. And so, you know, and so it'd be a finite thing, or it might be a full-scale thing. We don't know what would happen. Of course, Russia don't know what would happen. So, again, I'm just saying that's kind of the way I see that thing. The other aspect to me, as far as the nuclear issue, and, you know, I could see the idea that Russia at some point, in order to bolster the deterrence, I mean, there's been some talk about the idea of attacking again a NATO country. I think a bad idea. But on the other hand, low-yield tactical nuclear weapons can be used for actual military purposes. For instance, I saw one the other day. We'll just give you an example. There's a bridge that connects the Odessa region of Ukraine to the northern region, where a lot of supplies that come in from Romania and from ports that go up into the Ukraine, that, you know, and also other shipments go through that bridge. And the Russians were firing conventional missiles at the bridge and really not knocking the bridge out. I'm not sure if it survived ultimately or not at this point, but it certainly survived the first day or two of it. And so my point is, a single 5-kiloton tactical nuke would just take the bridge out and be done. And that area doesn't seem to be extremely populated. There'd be some collateral, but it would definitely do, like, you know, it would do three things. First of all, we get rid of the bugaboo. Do their tactical weapons really work or not? Oh, yeah, they worked. Okay. And would they actually use one? Yeah, they just did. So that settles that. And it actually destroys a bridge that otherwise would require a lot of ordnance and risk to get rid of with conventional weapons. It's gone. And all of a sudden, I think people would see the thing in a much more serious light and decide, do we really want to go to nuclear war and end the world as we know it, or do we want to end this stupid war? So, you know, that is a possibility if they really wanted to escalate. But so far, I don't think that they really see the need to do it. Putin is very reserved and doesn't really want to push it to that level. And remember, he has to consider a little bit what his Chinese friends think about it too, right? So I think for the moment, things are still on track, but we don't know what happens next. But that's kind of my rundown on that subject. I think it's worth just addressing, because it is the one thing right now that could lead to an absolute global calamity, and let's hope it don't happen. I think for the moment, I think Russia will not really push it that far. The Oreshnik thing is another issue, and they've used it 4 times, and apparently it worked 2 times, maybe 3 times even. And then the 4th time, apparently it landed in some area of sort of what would be a logical target area. And Putin said that was just a test so that their drones could see the effectiveness of it. Is he just covering for a failure? Perhaps. But even at that, we may be looking at something that has a 75% reliability rate. And remember, this is a developmental weapon. This is not a mature weapon at this point. So anyway, this kind of running down the situation. We'll have to watch and see what happens next, as they say. So all for this time. I'll be posting this on YouTube and Rumble as always, and the addresses of my social media accounts are in the description below. All for now.